The soup had gone cold before anyone thought to tell Cordelia Winslow it was hers. 50 feet of polished mahogany separated her place among the housekeeper and the second footman from the candlelit splendor of her cousin's table, and not one Prescott had turned to look for her. Then, at the head of the hall, a chair scraped back. Every fork stilled. The Duke of Rowanmere was standing, and he was not looking at his guests. He was looking at her. 60 guests watched Julian Fairfax cross his own dining hall as though it belonged to no one else in it. Lady Prescott's fan froze mid-stroke. Marianne's smile curdled into something colder. He stopped behind the servants' table, behind the one chair no footman had thought to pull out for a lady, and set his hand upon its back. "Miss Winslow," he said, loud enough for the rafters to carry it, "you're seated wrong." Cordelia did not understand yet that her whole life had just changed. A gasp rippled the length of the hall, though no one dared laugh, not with his jaw set like that, not with the old scar at his temple catching candlelight. Somewhere behind his ribs was a room he had not opened in 11 years, a sister's name he had not said aloud, and a promise made over a coffin too small for the guilt it carried. None of the guests gasping at his rudeness could have guessed what her cold plate had cost him to see. He pulled out the chair himself. He sat. And in the silence that followed, thick enough to choke on, Cordelia Winslow understood two things at once: that her aunt would never forgive her for this, and that the coldest man in England had just chosen her in front of everyone, for reasons she would not learn the whole of until it was almost too late. Cordelia Winslow had learned, in the 9 years since her father's death, that a room could hold her without ever truly seeing her. At Prescott Manor, she rose before the housemaids, mended linens no one thanked her for, and copied her uncle's correspondence in a hand steadier than his own. And for all of it, she was fed at the family table only when a chair happened to be spare. Her aunt, Lady Augusta Prescott, called her a comfort to have about the house, in the same breath she used for a well-trained spaniel. Her cousins, Marianne and Louisa, called her nothing at all when it suited them, which was often. She kept, in a trunk beneath her narrow bed, the only inheritance her father had left her: 41 books in 4 languages, a scholar's ruin of a library salvaged from a life that had ended in debt and disgrace before she was 13. She read by candle stubs the housekeeper let her keep. She had grown in the reading, a mind sharper than anyone at Prescott Manor cared to notice, and a spine no amount of quiet unkindness had yet managed to break. The summons to Rowanmere Hall arrived on a Tuesday, embossed and gold-edged, addressed with careful ceremony to Lady Prescott and the Mrs. Prescott for the Duke of Rowanmere's harvest ball. Cordelia's name appeared nowhere on it. She was included only because Marianne required a companion capable of lacing a gown correctly on the first attempt, and because a spare pair of useful hands never went entirely to waste on a journey of 2 days by carriage. "You will make yourself useful, and you will make yourself scarce," Lady Augusta instructed her the morning they departed, adjusting her gloves without once meeting Cordelia's eyes. "The Duke of Rowanmere does not entertain poor relations. He barely entertains anyone. 3 seasons in London, and the man has danced 11 times in as many years, they say, and never twice with the same lady." Cordelia said nothing. She had long since learned that her opinions were furniture no one had asked to be moved. She looked instead out the carriage window at the fields turning gold with early autumn, and let herself wonder, just once, what a house might feel like where a person's worth was not decided before she had said a single word in it. She did not yet know his name would be the last thing she thought of each night for the rest of her life. She knew only that the carriage was cold, that her cousins were arguing over ribbon, and that somewhere ahead of them stood a house so severe in its reputation that even her aunt lowered her voice to speak of its master. Rowanmere Hall rose out of the mist like something carved rather than built, gray stone softened by ivy and 3 centuries of English weather, its windows catching the last slow sun in long amber bars. Cordelia had seen grand houses in her father's old engravings, but no page had prepared her for the hush that settled over the carriage as it came up the drive, or the way even Marianne stopped mid-complaint to stare. The household received them with a precision that felt almost military. Footmen in dove-gray livery, a housekeeper, introduced as Mrs. Hollis, whose eyes moved over each new arrival with a calm, assessing kindness that Cordelia found, to her surprise, almost unbearably gentle after the carriage ride. Of the Duke himself, there was no sign, though his absence was somehow more present than another man's arrival would have been. Servants lowered their voices near his study door. A younger footman crossed himself, half joking, when told to deliver a letter to his private rooms unread. "They say he dismissed a whole household in a fortnight, 4 years back," Louisa whispered to her sister as they were shown upstairs, delighted by her own daring. Not a cruel word spoken, just that steady look of his, and out they went, one by one, until only the ones who could bear his silence remained. "Then we shall be very silent," Marianne said, smoothing her skirts before a gilt mirror, already rehearsing the smile she intended for him at dinner. Cordelia was given a small room at the end of a servant's corridor, plainer than her cousin's chambers, but cleaner than anything at Prescott Manor, and she was grateful for it in a way she did not examine too closely. It was there, an hour before the ball's dinner, that her aunt found her lacing Marianne's gown and delivered her instructions with the flat, practiced cruelty of a woman who had rehearsed the words on the road. "You will not sit with us tonight. A seat below the salt has been arranged with the upper servants, where a companion belongs. See that you do not embarrass this family by forgetting your place at a table like this one." She paused at the door, not quite looking back. "It is for your own comfort, Cordelia. No one will expect anything of you there." Cordelia straightened Marianne's last ribbon with hands that did not shake, though something in her chest had gone very quiet and very cold. She thought of her father's books, waiting in their trunk at home, and wondered what a man who commanded a household through silence alone would make of a woman seated, deliberately, where no one was meant to look at her twice. The dining hall at Rowanmere blazed with more candles than Cordelia had ever seen gathered under one roof. 100 small flames doubled in silver and crystal until the whole room seemed to glow from within. She was led, without ceremony, past the long table where 60 guests in silk and jewels were finding their places, to a shorter table set near the service door, where the housekeeper, the head groom, and 2 visiting ladies' companions already sat with the particular stillness of people accustomed to being overlooked. No one had told the kitchen she was coming. Her soup arrived last, and cold, set down by a harried footman who did not so much as glance at her before hurrying back toward the grander table, where laughter rose easy and bright beneath the chandeliers. Cordelia folded her hands in her lap and did not touch the spoon. She had endured worse than a cold bowl of soup. She told herself this steadily, the way she told herself most unkindnesses, and kept her spine straight and her eyes on the middle distance, refusing to let herself search the high table for her aunt's face, or for judgment, or for anyone at all. She did not know, could not have known, that at the head of that glittering table, a man had gone still over his own untouched glass of claret. Julian Fairfax, Duke of Rowanmere, had spent the better part of an hour performing the exact courtesies expected of him. A compliment here, a nod there, the careful management of 60 guests who wanted nothing so much as a moment of his rare attention. He had done it without difficulty, the way he did most things that required no feeling at all. Then his gaze had drifted, out of habit more than interest, to the far end of his own hall and found a young woman seated apart from the party she had arrived with, served last, served cold, sitting so straight and so composed that a stranger might have mistaken her stillness for indifference. Julian Fairfax did not mistake it. He recognized it immediately, the particular discipline of a person who had trained themselves not to flinch in public, because he had once watched someone he loved learn that same discipline, at that same kind of table, and had done nothing to stop it. He set down his glass. Conversation at the high table did not pause, not yet. Not until his chair scraped back against the floor with a sound too deliberate to be an accident, and 60 pairs of eyes turned, one by one, to follow him. He crossed the length of his own dining hall the way other men crossed a battlefield, unhurried, unreadable, while the room behind him fell into a silence so complete that Cordelia heard his boots on the stone floor before she understood, with a lurch of pure disbelief, that he was walking toward her table and not away from it. Lady Prescott's fan stopped mid-air. Marianne's smile, aimed hopefully in his direction moments before, curdled into something confused, and then, as he passed her without a glance, something colder still. Whispers began before he had even reached the servants' end of the hall, a rustle of silk and disapproval that he seemed not to hear at all, or simply did not care to. He stopped behind the one empty chair beside Cordelia's, the chair no footman had thought to fill because a companion did not require the courtesy of a full-place setting. He set his hand upon its back. Miss Winslow." His voice was quiet, but the hall had gone so silent it carried to every corner of it regardless. "You are seated wrong." Cordelia looked up at him properly for the first time. A tall man, dark-haired, a thin pale scar at his temple catching the candlelight. His expression composed into something so controlled, it might have read as boredom to anyone who had not just watched him cross an entire room to say 4 words to a woman with no name worth remembering. "Your Grace," she managed, "I was seated exactly where I was told to be." "Then you were told wrong." He pulled the chair back himself, an act so beneath a duke that a lady 2 seats down audibly gasped. "I do not permit cold food at my table, nor guests seated as an afterthought in my own house. I am not a guest, Your Grace. I am a companion." "Tonight," he said, lowering himself into the chair beside her, with the same unhurried calm he had used across the hall, "you are whichever one I say you are." It was not warmth in his voice, not precisely. There was too much iron in it for that, too much of the careful control Cordelia would come to know so well in the weeks that followed. But beneath the iron ran something else entirely, something that made her chest ache in a way she could not name and did not trust. A tenderness so tightly leashed it looked, to anyone watching from a safer distance, exactly like cruelty turned inside out. Behind his still, composed face, Julian Fairfax was thinking of a girl who had once sat exactly where Cordelia sat now, and had never once had anyone rise for her. And he did not say her name aloud, not yet, not to anyone, though it sat behind his ribs like a stone that had waited 11 years to be moved. The scandal did not wait for morning. Lady Prescott found Cordelia the moment the ladies withdrew, gripping her arm hard enough to bruise through her sleeve and steering her into an empty antechamber, with a smile still fixed for anyone watching in the corridor. "What did you say to him?" Her aunt's whisper was venomous, all pretense of affection gone. "What did you do to make a man like that make such a spectacle of my family?" "I did nothing, Aunt. I sat where I was told, and ate cold soup, and said 4 words to a man who chose entirely on his own to sit beside me. You will say nothing of it. You will not seek him out. You will not linger where he might find you, and you will pray, Cordelia, that by morning the whole business is forgotten, as some passing eccentricity of his, and not the ruin of Marianne's chances in this house." Lady Augusta's fingers tightened once more before releasing her. "You have always been a drain on this family's patience. Do not become its downfall as well." Cordelia returned to her small room at the end of the servants' corridor and did not sleep. She lay listening to the house settle around her, to distant laughter still drifting up from some card room where the ball's aftermath was being picked apart, syllable by syllable, and she turned over again and again 4 words spoken by a stranger who had crossed an entire dining hall rather than let her sit unseen. She told herself it meant nothing. Great men performed small kindnesses sometimes, the way they might toss a coin to a beggar, and thought no more of it by dawn. She told herself this until dawn actually came, gray and quiet through her narrow window, and a knock sounded at her door that made her sit upright before she had even fully understood she was afraid. It was not her aunt. It was a housemaid, young and wide-eyed, holding a folded note sealed in plain wax, addressed in a hand so precise it looked engraved rather than written. "Cordelia Winslow," it said, nothing more. No courtesy title, no flourish, as though the man who had written it saw no need to dress up a simple fact with ornament. She broke the seal with fingers that were, for the first time since the dining hall, not entirely steady. The note asked nothing of her feelings and offered no apology for the scene at dinner, which she found, oddly, more reassuring than any apology could have been. It requested only that Miss Winslow present herself at the library at 9 o'clock, as His Grace required assistance with a matter of correspondence, and that her aunt's household had already been informed. The loan of her time was expected for the remainder of the house party. Lady Prescott had not been informed so much as overruled, Cordelia understood, when she found her aunt at breakfast wearing the particular brittle smile of a woman who had lost an argument she never got to have. The library at Rowanmere occupied the whole of the east wing, 2 stories of dark wood shelving, climbing toward a painted ceiling, ladders on brass rails, and a hush so complete that Cordelia found herself walking on the balls of her feet without deciding to. The Duke was already at the great desk when she entered, coat off, sleeves turned back, surrounded by boxes of correspondence yellowed with age. "My mother's letters," he said without looking up, as though their conversation the previous evening had never paused. 40 years of them, unsorted, and my secretary has neither the patience nor, I suspect, the discretion for the task. You read Greek. I am told you read 4 languages competently and complain in none of them. Who told you that, Your Grace? Mrs. Hollis makes it her business to know everyone under this roof within a day of their arrival. He gestured at last to the chair opposite his own, not the servant's end of a distant table, but directly across from him, close enough that she could see the ink stain at his cuff and the faint shadows beneath his eyes, as though sleep came to him no more easily than it had come to her. "Sit, Miss Winslow. I do not require gratitude for a chair. I require only that you not waste my time." As she crossed the room toward it, Cordelia let her gaze pass, just once, over a narrow door set into the far wall, half hidden behind a folding screen, its brass handle dulled with disuse in a house where every other surface gleamed. She said nothing of it, but she noticed the way his eyes followed hers there, briefly, before returning with visible effort to the letters spread across his desk. And she understood, without being told, that whatever waited behind that door was a room he had not opened in a very long time. They worked through the mornings that followed in a silence that Cordelia came, gradually, to understand was not coldness at all, but a kind of trust, the particular ease of 2 people who did not feel obliged to fill every quiet moment with talk that meant nothing. He read faster than she did, she noticed, but he read her translations twice, slowly, as though weighing each word she had chosen against the ones he might have chosen himself. On the 3rd morning, a fire was lit in the library grate before she had even arrived, though the room rarely warranted one so early in autumn. On the 4th, a tray appeared at her elbow, at exactly the hour her hands had begun to ache with cold ink and colder fingers. Tea poured the way she preferred it, though she had never once mentioned a preference to anyone in that house. "Mrs. Hollis again?" she asked when she caught him glancing, for the 3rd time, at the level of the pot. "Mrs. Hollis attends to the household. I attend to the library." He did not look up from his letter. "It is simply more efficient to keep a translator functioning than to explain a delay to my solicitor." "How practical of you, Your Grace." "I find sentiment inefficient?" A pause, the faintest shift at the corner of his mouth that was not quite a smile, and had, she suspected, not been permitted to become one in a very long time. And yet, here we are, 3 fires and 2 trays deep into an inefficiency I cannot seem to correct. It was the closest thing to warmth she had heard from him, delivered in the same flat, precise voice he used for everything, and it startled a real laugh out of her before she could stop it, a small, surprised sound that made him look up properly, for the first time that morning, and hold her gaze a beat longer than the correspondence between them required. Cordelia looked back down at her page first, because someone had to, and because she had learned, over 22 careful years, exactly how dangerous it was to enjoy being looked at by a man who could, with a single sentence, undo everything her family had left of its standing. But she found, turning the next letter over, that she was smiling at the page rather than at him, and that this too felt like something she was not yet ready to give up. It was 2 days later, deep into a box of letters written in a hand she did not recognize, that Cordelia found the first mention of a name no one at Rowanmere had spoken in her hearing. Beatrice. "My dearest Beatrice grows taller each month and reads better than her brother did at the same age," one letter said, dated some 17 years past, in a mother's proud, looping script. She glanced up to ask who Beatrice was, and found the Duke already watching her, his expression gone suddenly, entirely shuttered. "You needn't read that one," he said, and took the letter from her hand with a gentleness that did nothing to soften the finality of the gesture. "It has no bearing on the correspondence I require sorted. Your Grace, if she was she is not a subject for discussion." The words came out harder than perhaps he intended. She saw something flicker behind his eyes immediately after, something that looked almost like regret, though he did not soften the sentence to match it. "Forgive me, it grows late. You should rest before dinner." Cordelia rose, gathering her things slowly, unwilling to leave the question unasked entirely, even as she understood she would not be permitted an answer that day. At the door, she paused, glancing back once toward the narrow door behind the folding screen, the one with the dulled brass handle, and found him standing exactly where she had left him, not sorting letters at all now, but staring at that same door as though it might, given long enough, finally open on its own. "Whoever she was," Cordelia said quietly, "I think you have been carrying her a very long time, Your Grace." He did not answer, but he did not tell her she was wrong either, and that silence, a heavier and more honest than any denial could have been, followed her all the way back to her small room at the end of the servants' corridor, where she lay awake once more, wondering what a man like Julian Fairfax could possibly have done, or failed to do, to earn a grief he still would not name aloud after so many years of practice at silence. She thought of the mother's letter still spread across the desk in weight of translation, of the odd tenderness in a handwriting that clearly adored a daughter named only once in all the boxes she had sorted so far. Somewhere in this vast, meticulous house, kept behind a locked door and a decade of silence, was the answer to a question she had not yet found the courage to ask aloud herself, and she resolved, before sleep finally took her, that she would find a gentler way to ask it than the one that had already cost him so much composure. The letter that undid whatever fragile peace had settled over Prescott Manor's house party arrived for Sir Reginald Prescott on the 9th day, delivered not by the ordinary post, but by a rider from the Fairfax estate office, and Cordelia heard the shouting from 2 floors above before she learned any of the particulars. Her uncle's mortgage on Prescott Manor, it emerged over a strained family dinner that evening, had been quietly purchased some months prior, bundled, along with several other provincial debts, into a portfolio managed by the Duke of Rowanmere's solicitors. A transaction so unremarkable to a man of his fortune that Sir Reginald had not even been informed of the change in creditor until a routine notice arrived confirming it. "He owns us," Lady Augusta said, very quietly, once the servants had cleared the final course and left the family alone with the wreckage of the news. "Every stick of furniture in this house, every acre we call ours, answers now to a man who made a public fool of Marianne to seat a companion at his own table. He did not know, Aunt, when he purchased the debt, that it does not matter what he knew." Marianne's voice cracked with a fury Cordelia had never heard from her before, something rawer than jealousy over a chair at dinner. "It matters that our whole family's future sits now in the hand of a man you have somehow made notice you, when 3 seasons of my best gowns and best manners could not earn a second glance." Cordelia said nothing, because there was nothing safe to say, and because a colder thought had already taken root beneath her ribs that whatever had passed between herself and the Duke of Rowanmere in a quiet library over translated letters was no longer a small, private thing between 2 people who liked each other's silences. It was, whether either of them had intended it or not, now bound up entirely with her family's survival, with a debt large enough to end them, held in the hands of the very man whose attention had caused all this trouble in the first place. She excused herself before the meal's end, unable to sit through her cousin's recriminations a moment longer, and found herself walking without quite deciding toward the east wing, toward the one room in that entire enormous house where, for a handful of hours each morning, she had stopped feeling like a burden anyone was obliged to carry. She found him not in the library but in the small estate office beside it, papers spread across a desk far less elegant than the one where they usually worked, his cravat loosened in a way she had never seen, as though he had been at the ledgers since well before dawn. He looked up when she entered without knocking, and something in her face must have told him everything, because he did not ask what had brought her. "You've heard then. The whole house has heard, Your Grace. My uncle's debt. Your name attached to it." She made herself say the next part plainly, though her voice shook at the edges of it. "Did you know, when you rose from your table and crossed your own hall for me, that you would soon hold my family's whole future in a single ledger?" "No." He set down his pen. "I did not learn of the connection until 3 days after that dinner, when my solicitor brought me the portfolio for review, as he does every quarter, and I recognized your uncle's name attached to a debt I could, with a stroke of a pen, either call in full or set quietly aside. And which will you do? I have already done it." He turned a single sheet toward her, a formal notation, dated that very morning, extending the mortgage's term by 5 years, at an interest so far reduced it was scarcely worth the ink. "I will not pretend it is entirely without motive. I do not enjoy watching families ruined for the sport of it, and I find I have grown this fortnight, particularly disinclined to watch this one ruin the one member of it who never asked me for a single thing." They will say you did it for me, that you have bought my family's silence to keep me near you. Let them say it." He held her gaze steadily, the careful control in his voice fraying just slightly at its edges. "I find, Miss Winslow, that I have stopped caring a great deal what this county says of my reasons, so long as the reasons themselves remain sound. You are not a debt I am settling. You are the first correspondence in this house I have not wanted to finish reading." Cordelia did not trust herself to answer that. She only nodded once and left before either of them could say anything further that neither was yet prepared to survive. Marianne Prescott did not accept defeat easily, and by the following week's assembly ball at the Chetwynd estate, the county's second great gathering of the season, and the first at which the Duke of Rowanmere's altered attentions could be tested before a wider audience, she had rebuilt her strategy with the precision of a general. She wore her mother's rubies, borrowed against a debt no longer quite so forgiving, and she positioned herself all evening precisely where the Duke's path through any room was most likely to cross her own. Lady Prescott orchestrated introductions with the tireless energy of a woman fighting for her family's entire future, steering acquaintances, calling in favors, ensuring that wherever Julian Fairfax turned, a Prescott daughter awaited him with a rehearsed and dazzling smile. Cordelia, meanwhile, had been left deliberately at the edge of the ballroom, seated among the chaperones once more, not with servants this time. Her aunt had been careful about that, mindful of scandal, but far enough from the dancing that the arrangement's intention could not be mistaken. She watched Marianne curtsy to the Duke with practiced grace. She watched him bow in return, correct and utterly unmoved, his eyes already drifting past her cousin's shoulder toward the shadowed row of chairs, where the unmarried and unwanted sat out the evening. Lady Chetwynd, their hostess, a woman whose appetite for gossip was matched only by her gift for spreading it, had noticed the direction of his attention days before the ball even began. "They say he visits the library at Rowanmere daily now," she murmured to a cluster of eager listeners near the punch table, loud enough that the words carried deliberately to where Cordelia sat. A companion, of all things? One wonders what precisely the Duke of Rowanmere requires translated, that requires quite so many hours alone with a poor relation, nobody troubled to invite to this ball in her own right. The laughter that followed was soft, cruel, in the particular way only drawing-room laughter can be, and Cordelia kept her eyes on her folded hands and her spine perfectly straight, exactly as she had at that first cold dinner, refusing to give the room the satisfaction of watching her flinch. She did not see him cross the floor. She heard only the room's sudden hush, and looked up to find Julian Fairfax standing directly before her chair, his hand already extended. "Miss Winslow!" His voice carried, deliberately this time, pitched for every ear straining to hear it. "I believe this is my dance. You have not asked me for a single dance all evening, Your Grace, and I have made no request of one. I am asking now." Something almost gentle moved behind the iron of his expression, a private amusement meant only for her. "Unless you would rather I stand here indefinitely, in front of Lady Chetwynd's punch table, until the whole room forgets how to breathe properly." Cordelia took his hand. She felt the ballroom's attention land on her like a physical weight the moment she rose, felt Marianne's stare and her aunt's frozen smile and a dozen fans stilling mid-motion across the room, and told herself, as she let him lead her onto the floor, that she would not spend this dance thinking of any of them. She had not expected him to move so surely, given how sparingly he had ever offered even the smallest social grace, and she found herself watching his hands rather than the room around her. He danced, she discovered, the way he did everything, with total economical control, no flourish wasted, his hand at her waist steady and sure, through steps she had not fully mastered. "You are frowning at your feet, Miss Winslow. I am concentrating, Your Grace, on not disgracing either of us further in front of half the county. You could not disgrace me if you tried." The words were quiet, meant only for her, stripped for once of any careful distance. "I have watched you endure a colder room than this one without a single flinch. A missed step among people who have already decided to gossip regardless is hardly the ruin you imagine." By the time the music ended, the whispers around the ballroom's edges had shifted in temperature entirely, no longer the sharp, delighted cruelty of Lady Chetwynd's punch table circle, but something quieter, more calculating, the sound of a county recalculating exactly how much power a companion with no fortune and no name might, improbably, now hold. Marianne left the ball early, feigning a headache. Lady Prescott's smile, fixed all evening, finally cracked entirely somewhere near the cloakroom, where she was overheard telling her husband that their niece had, through means no one could quite name, become a threat they had badly underestimated. And somewhere in a quiet corridor outside, a note was already being drafted, by whom Cordelia would not learn until it was very nearly too late, threatening to make public a secret from her father's ruined past that Lady Prescott had sworn for 9 years never to speak of at all. It was Mrs. Hollis who finally told her, 3 nights later, in the hushed hour after the household had gone to bed, and Cordelia had wandered down to the kitchens unable to sleep. Drawn by the memory of the warm bread the cook always left cooling near the hearth, she found the housekeeper there instead, mending by lamplight, and something in the older woman's face, tired, careful, weighing a decision, told Cordelia that tonight, finally, a door might open. "You've noticed the room behind the library screen," Mrs. Hollis said, without preamble, not looking up from her needle, "and the name in the old letters he took from your hand before you could finish reading it. Beatrice, his sister, 4 years younger than his Grace, and the gentlest soul this house ever held, God rest her." Mrs. Hollis set down her mending at last, her eyes distant, with a grief that had clearly never fully healed 12 years on. "Their father was a hard man, Miss Winslow, harder than the current Duke has ever let himself become, whatever the county says of his silences. When Lady Beatrice fell ill with a fever her second winter out, the old Duke would not have her at his table, would not have the ton see a Fairfax weakened, coughing into a handkerchief in front of guests he'd invited for his own vanity's sake." Cordelia felt something cold settle low in her stomach, already half guessing the shape of what came next. He had her move below stairs, told the household it was for her comfort, quieter there, away from the noise of company, the very words near enough that your own aunt used on you, "If the housemaid's gossip reaches me true." She ate her meals alone in a servant's room for the better part of 2 months, while her father entertained upstairs as though nothing at all were amiss, and young Master Julian, he wasn't Duke yet, not for 2 more years, used to sneak down after the household slept, to sit with her, to read to her, because he was 17 and had no power yet to change what his father had decided. And when he did have the power, Mrs. Hollis's needle did not move again for a long moment. By then, Miss Winslow, it was already far too late to matter to her. Cordelia sat very still, the warm kitchen suddenly airless around her, understanding at last why a man who commanded a household through silence alone had crossed an entire hall for a stranger seated wrong at his own table. It was not chivalry she had witnessed that night. It was 12 years of unfinished grief finally refusing to watch history repeat itself. "She died that spring," Mrs. Hollis went on quietly, as though the words still cost her something to say aloud after 12 years of practiced silence. "A fever the physicians called simple enough to survive, in a warm room, properly nursed, properly seen. She was moved back upstairs only once it was already beyond any mending, and His Grace, young Master Julian then, sat with her those last 3 days and would let no one else near the room, not even his own father, who came too late and was turned away at the door by a 17-year-old boy, too grief-stricken to care what it cost him. And the room behind the screen, her old sitting room. He had it sealed the week after her funeral, and has not, to my knowledge, let another soul inside it, since not decorators, not his own mother before she passed, God keep her, not any guest in 12 years of house parties held in that same library not 20 feet from its door." Mrs. Hollis studied Cordelia's face carefully now, some private calculation resolving itself behind her tired eyes. Until, it would seem, he began looking at the door rather more often than he used to this past fortnight. "Since you arrived, Miss Winslow, if the servants' talk is to be trusted, and servants generally are, in a house like this one." Cordelia sat with the weight of it a long moment, the cold soup in the crossed hall, and the note at dawn, and the tea poured exactly as she liked it, all of it rearranging itself now into a shape she finally understood. He had not simply seen a companion seated wrongly at his table. He had seen his sister's ghost in a stranger's straight spine and silent dignity, and something in him, buried 12 years deep beneath careful iron and colder silences, had refused, this one time, to stay seated and watch it happen again. "Does he know that you know?" Cordelia asked softly. About Beatrice, that you've told me? No, miss. Mrs. Hollis picked her mending back up. The conversation, by her own quiet reckoning, concluded. And I'd think carefully before you tell him you know it either. Some doors, even opened a crack by an old housekeeper's guilty conscience, are still his alone to walk through first. Cordelia climbed the stairs to her small room, long after the candle in the kitchen had guttered out, carrying a grief that was not hers to carry, and yet, somehow, already felt entirely her own. And she did not sleep again that night, for wondering how gently a locked door ought to be opened. He came to her the following evening, before dinner, finding her in the library earlier than their usual hour, with an urgency in his step she had not seen from him before. He carried a small brass key she had never once seen him produce in all their weeks of working across that same desk from one another. I understand Mrs. Hollis spoke to you, he said, without any of his usual careful preamble. She confessed it to me herself an hour ago, half in tears, certain I would dismiss her for it after 30 years of loyal service. I told her she had nothing to fear from me. I find lately that I have grown tired of guarding a grief no one but myself has ever been permitted to carry. You are not obligated to show me anything, Your Grace. I know that. He crossed to the screen and drew it aside, revealing the narrow door in full for the first time, its brass handle dulled with a decade's disuse. His hand hesitated over the lock only a moment before the key turned. I have wanted to, regardless, since the night you first noticed it and said nothing, because you understood even then that some things ought not be forced open before a person is ready. The room beyond was small, sun-faded, exactly as it must have looked 12 years before. A girl's sitting room, a half-finished embroidery still stretched on its frame, a shelf of books arranged by a hand that had clearly loved them. Above the cold, unlit hearth hung a portrait, turned to face the wall for a decade, which the Duke now, with visible effort, lifted and turned around. A young woman looked out from the canvas, perhaps 16 at the sitting, fair where her brother was dark, with the same steady, watchful eyes Cordelia had come to know so well across a library desk. Lady Beatrice, Cordelia said softly, though she already knew the name. My sister. Julian Fairfax stood before the portrait a long moment, his careful control visibly costing him more than she had ever seen it cost him. The only person in this world who ever looked at me the way you looked at that cold bowl of soup, Miss Winslow, as though enduring quietly was simply what one did, and complaint would only give the ones responsible the satisfaction of knowing they had wounded you at all. My father moved her below stairs when she was ill, he said, before Cordelia could speak, the words coming faster now, as though 12 years of careful silence had finally found a crack it could not help widening. Told the whole household it was for her comfort. I was 17, and I understood, even then, precisely what it truly was, that he could not bear a sickly daughter reflecting poorly on a dinner table full of guests he cared for more than he cared for her. I said nothing. I was a boy, and he was a duke, and I told myself there would be time later to make it right. There was no time. There was no time. He said it flatly, an old wound worn smooth by repetition, though his eyes, when they finally left the portrait to find hers, were not flat at all. I have spent 12 years since telling myself that the next time cruelty tried to seat someone I valued below the salt in my own house, I would not wait for a later that might never come. I did not fully understand, until the night of the harvest ball, how much of that vow had been waiting, all this time, for someone worth keeping it for. Your Grace, Julian, the word came quietly, an offering rather than a correction. I find I would very much like to hear you say it, at least once, in a room that has not heard a kind voice in a very long time. Julian. Cordelia said it carefully, as though testing whether the room itself might object, and found instead that something in his shoulders eased, some tension held for 12 years, finally, briefly, allowed to rest. He reached for her hand where it rested near the embroidery frame, his fingers closing around hers with a gentleness that undid her far more thoroughly than any grand declaration could have managed, and for a long moment neither of them spoke at all, the silence between them no longer cold but full at last of everything neither had yet found the courage to say aloud. It was the sound of hurried footsteps in the library beyond, and Mrs. Hollis's voice, unusually urgent, calling his name through the half-open door, that finally broke the stillness and told them both, before a single word was spoken, that whatever had arrived could not possibly be good news. The letter Mrs. Hollis carried had come by express rider from London, addressed to Lady Prescott, but delivered, by some accident of the household's confusion, directly into the Duke's hands instead. It named, in a stranger's careful, poisonous script, the full particulars of a scandal Cordelia's family had buried 9 years before her father's death. A matter of forged accounts at a merchant bank, his name attached though never proven. Disgrace enough that the family had fled 2 counties over, rather than face what remained of their standing. "Someone means to publish it," Julian said, reading the thread aloud in a voice gone hard and flat with fury he was visibly working to master. "Anonymously, in the London papers, unless a sum is paid by week's end. They mean to ruin your father's memory, and you along with it, to force your family from society entirely." "They mean to ruin me," Cordelia said quietly, "because ruining me is the surest way left to punish you for choosing me, without ever having to say so plainly." She thought, with a clarity that steadied her more than it frightened her, of Lady Chetwynd's punch table and the note she had sensed being drafted that same night, of Mary Ann's early departure, and her aunt's cracked smile in the cloakroom, of a family that had spent 9 years guarding one secret and would, she now understood, spend whatever remained of their pride protecting it a while longer, even at her expense. "I will pay it," Julian said. "Whatever sum they name, I will pay it before the week is out, and it will end there." "No?" Cordelia surprised herself with the steadiness of her own refusal. "If you pay it quietly, they will only come again, with some other secret, some other threat, for as long as paying quietly remains the easier answer. I have spent my whole life being managed quietly, moved below stairs and out of sight so that other people's comfort could be preserved. I find I am finished with quiet." Julian studied her a long moment, something that might, in a less careful man, have been called pride moving behind his composed expression. "Then tell me what you would have me do instead, Miss Winslow, and I will do it, whatever it costs either of us." "Make it impossible for them to ruin me," she said, "by making certain, in front of everyone who matters, exactly whose name I carry before this week is out." He did not wait a week. Within 3 days, invitations had gone out under the Fairfax seal to every family who had attended the Chetwynd assembly, summoning them back to Rowanmere Hall for an announcement the notice described only as a matter of considerable importance to the Duke's household, enough ambiguity to guarantee that not a single invited guest, however offended by the short notice, would risk staying away. Cordelia stood beside him that evening, in the same dining hall where a cold bowl of soup had begun everything, dressed not as a companion this time, but in a gown of deep green silk that Mrs. Hollis had produced from somewhere, with a satisfaction she made no effort to hide, her hair dressed properly for the first time since her arrival at Rowanmere. Lady Prescott arrived pale and rigid, flanked by daughters who had clearly been told nothing of what awaited them, and took her seat at the high table with the brittle composure of a woman braced for the worst. Julian rose when the final course had been cleared, precisely as he had risen weeks before, and the hall fell into the same electric silence it had learned, by now, to expect from him. "Some of you have heard rumors this fortnight," he said, his voice carrying without effort to every corner of the room, "concerning myself and Miss Cordelia Winslow. I will not waste this evening correcting rumor with more rumor. I will simply tell you what is true." He turned to face her fully, and every fan in the room stilled at once. "I have asked Miss Winslow to be my wife. She has accepted. Any correspondence intended to threaten her family's standing may henceforth be addressed directly to mine, as her standing and my own are, as of this evening, one and the same." The silence that followed lasted only a heartbeat before it broke into a roar of astonished conversation. But Cordelia heard none of it clearly, watching instead Lady Prescott's face move through fury and calculation, and, finally, a kind of defeated arithmetic, as she understood exactly how thoroughly the ground beneath her family had shifted. Mary Ann did not speak at all. She only stared, white-faced, at the woman she had once ordered, seated with the servants, now standing at the head of the grandest table in the county, wearing a duke's declared intention like a crown no one in that room could any longer take from her. They were married at Rowanmere's small stone chapel on a bright morning in late autumn, the same golden season in which Cordelia had first arrived at the estate with nothing to her name but a trunk of her father's books and a spine that had never once been permitted to bend. Mrs. Hollis wept openly through the entire ceremony. Seated in the family pew by the Duke's own particular instruction, an honor no housekeeper at Rowanmere had ever before been granted, and one she accepted, Cordelia noticed, with the quiet pride of a woman who had waited 12 long years to see that pew properly filled again. Lady Prescott attended because refusing an invitation from the Duchess of Rowanmere's own family would have cost more standing than the county now afforded her to lose. She sat stiffly beside her husband, her smile fixed and correct, and said, when it came time to offer her congratulations at the wedding breakfast, only that she had always known her niece possessed a certain quiet quality that would serve her well, as though 9 years of cold suppers and careless dismissal had never happened at all. Cordelia accepted the compliment with a graciousness that cost her nothing, because she had, by then, nothing left to prove to a woman whose good opinion she no longer required. Mary Ann did not attend the wedding breakfast. She sent a note instead, brief and formal, wishing her cousin every happiness. And Cordelia, who understood better than anyone in that chapel what it cost a proud person to lose so publicly the thing they had wanted most, found she could forgive her for it entirely, and meant the forgiveness when she wrote back to say so. Julian led her, after the ceremony, not to the grand rooms prepared for the wedding party, but first, quietly, to the small sitting room behind the library screen, its door standing open now for the first time in 12 years. Sunlight falling properly across the portrait of a fair-haired girl who had once been made to disappear from her own family's table. He had had fresh flowers placed beneath it that morning, Cordelia noticed, and a second chair brought in beside the old one, as though the room, finally, was meant to be occupied again by more than a memory kept carefully sealed. "I think she would have liked you very much," Julian said quietly, and Cordelia, looking at the portrait's steady, watchful eyes, found she believed him entirely. By the following spring, the story of the companion seated with the servants who became the Duchess of Rowanmere had traveled the length of the county and well beyond it, softened and reshaped a dozen times in a dozen drawing rooms until barely a version of it resembled precisely what had happened. Cordelia found she did not mind the exaggeration. Let them say what they liked of chairs and cold soup and a duke's sudden scandal. She knew the truth of it herself, and so, more importantly, did he. She kept her father's 41 books on a shelf in what had once been Beatrice's sitting room, now hers as well, sunlight reaching it properly every morning for the first time in over a decade. She and Julian sat there together most evenings, reading in the particular companionable silence they had first discovered across a library desk, a silence that had never once, from that very first cold dinner onward, meant she was unseen. Lady Beatrice's portrait remained above the hearth, no longer turned to the wall, no longer a grief locked away and guarded alone. Cordelia liked to think, on quiet evenings, that some part of the girl in that painting could see how thoroughly her brother had finally kept the promise he made at her graveside, that no one seated at his table, in his house, in his heart, would ever again be made to disappear. Even Mary Ann visited eventually, that following autumn, hesitant and careful at first, and found, to her quiet surprise, a cousin who bore her no grudge at all, only the same steady kindness that had once gone unnoticed at a dinner table, neither of them would ever quite forget. If a story like this one has ever moved you, a wronged woman seen at last, a cold man undone by one act of quiet mercy, a family who scorned her, forced finally to watch her cherished, we would love to hear which moment struck you hardest. Was it the chair pulled out in front of 60 stunned guests, or the door to a locked room finally opened for her alone? Tell us in the comments below, and if tales of forbidden love, slow burn devotion, and quiet women finally seen for who they truly are, speak to you the way this one was written to, subscribe to Forbidden Romance, so you never miss the next story waiting behind a closed door.